Lector and avid reader, not yet a booktuber, but I'm here for the conversation.
Nice.
I'm Richard Nell. I'm a Canadian fantasy writer, and I wrote the book we're going to discuss. So I'm obviously very biased in the negative.
Hi everyone, I'm Mihir. I'm one of the bloggers at Fantasy Book Critic,
Uh-oh.
and I'm glad to be here. Thanks to Steve.
Yeah. Thanks everyone for coming by to chat. I mean, we've talked about every book Richard's done, so I thought we can't leave this one out. So it's only fitting. So Joshua has actually finished the book today, and this is his first experience reading Richard Nell. So Joshua, what were your thoughts on it?
Well, it was my first Richard Nell book, and Flintlock Fantasy, which is weird for me. And I really, really loved it. It was fast-paced, a lot of action, just right up my alley, and can't wait to get into your other books. Of course, I've heard they are a bit different.
Yeah, it's a funny thing as a writer, you sort of have the Sherlock Holmes conundrum. Do you keep writing the thing that people liked and just, don't change and make it, or do you write new things? Because usually it's new things that excite artists of any stripe. We always want to get to the new thing, but then the fans are saying, hey, I really loved the last thing you did. I want more of that. But yeah, I've been experimenting, so I've got a few different things. We can maybe talk about some of that.
Yeah,
but,
no worries. I wanted to keep on reading. I was like, and when is the next one due? Well, that's for later.
Yeah. And Mihir, what were your thoughts on this one?
Well, spoiler alert, I loved it. It was quite different though. This one, I got to it a little bit later though than most people, because I believe Richard, if I'm not wrong, he released these novellas first separately, right? The first one came out in 2017, just after your debut, and the second one, The Devil of the 22nd, came out in 2018. I read them, I think, closer to 2019 when I discovered Richard, and I was, basically just emailing him about when's the next book coming out. I think then he was just tired enough of those emails, and he's like, okay, read these. There's something out already. Read this, and maybe we'll talk about it later. So that's when I discovered it, and I just thought it was, of course, after the brilliance of Kings of Paradise, this was something drastically different, but still equally exciting. And it had demons, which, of course, not a lot of fantasy books do that and do that really well. So it was a plus for me.
Yeah, you're right. They were, when I first wrote them, so the book is two novellas, essentially, in the same world. Just two different places in the world, two different characters. Well, a host of different characters, but two main different protagonists, and sort of only connected by the world, not by the plot or anything like that. Though in the future, I think we could say, it's fair to say, they will be connected.
That's interesting to hear. And when you say the future, do you mean the faraway future, near future? Because
so yeah, I guess I should explain. So this is, you might call it a prequel book or prequel novellas to what will eventually be at least the trilogy called the God King Chronicles. Called that because the main creator of the world of one, let's say the kingdom in one of the stories, is a man named God King Marson.
Mm-hmm.
And he has ruled for 300 years. This is not typical in this world. Everybody else lives normal lives, generally speaking. So there'll be a history behind that, and the books will explore it. And the enter the story, it's sort of the piece of the story where God King Marson's rule is failing. His health is finally failing, and he's on the edge of death. And the characters in this story, as we see, some of them have these demons inside them that when a character dies, they escape. They're sort of immortal. They can't be killed. And the only real solution is to trap them in somebody else. But the more powerful the demon, the more difficult it is to trap. And this God King has the most powerful demon of all. And they haven't been able to find anyone in 300 years who can take it. So they've got a bit of a problem on their hands. And that's sort of the driving plot of the story, let's say. Mm-hmm. And everybody knows that when this man dies, even if they can contain the demon, it's been sort of him that's held this world together and held the peace. And so there's all these kingdoms, and the technology has been changing. You know, in his life, they've gone from medieval technology to early technology guns or flintlock guns. So everything is sort of ripe for revolution and chaos and a redistribution, and it's just waiting for that sort of last rock or the last straw to fall. And if this man dies, everybody knows that it's going to be a free-for-all gong show.
Yeah.
Ooh, that's really fascinating.
Yeah, I was really hoping you would say that, because I was not ready to let go of those characters yet.
Yes, so especially... Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to say the whole setup you did with like the first character, Johan. It was like I strapped into a roller coaster and did not know what to expect. And the first turn came and it was like, whew, from there, everything, information, world building, everything just clicked and went at a pace. And
very pleased to hear that. These stories are sort of adventure in style, so they're quick. I wrote another book similar to that, I guess, Dark Sea's End. Probably, it's not Flintlock, but it's probably similar in pacing, similar in presentation, I would say. And I suspect when I get to the actual trilogy, it'll be a bit slower than that. It'll be some combination between the Flintlock and Ash and Sand, which is my other finished trilogy, which is more epic and dark. I don't know how Mihir and Steve would describe them, but that's usually what I say. And I'm looking for some combination between the two for this next trilogy. It'll be faster, lighter, but still fairly epic in scale compared to probably your average book.
Well, Dark Sea's End was a very distinct departure from your previous trilogy. Like it was small. It was smaller. I know you and I have talked about this. It was like less than 90,000 words, which in fantasy terms, it's like it's novella sized if you think about it. Because with every book being 150, 200K, yours was like tiny. It jumped up and it just went off, to the races till the end. You always have kind of shown this, kind of like drastic departure from the previous book that you have written. Like, even with these two novellas coming after Kings of Paradise, which is a slow, more, nuanced story, this, like, like Joshua mentioned, they're quicker. They're Flintlock fantasy, kind of like totally different genre-wise. Even with Dark Sea's End, after the ending that you provided in Kings of Heaven and, the trilogy, that book was so different as well. What is it that, that makes you jump from the previous settings that you have created so successfully, I should add, and then jump and do something else distinctly different?
Good question. Attention deficit disorder. I don't know. As I say, I think most artist types, we get bored really quickly. As soon as we do a thing, we think, okay, on to the next thing. And so you're always looking, for myself. So I'm currently writing a book that's progression fantasy, basically. I'm writing it in first person. All of these other books that I've written have always been in third person. So I'm always looking to expand. I'm trying to improve. I didn't know I could write a fast-paced book until I did, essentially. And Kings of Paradise and the Ash and Sand trilogy, it was really a coming-of-age story. That was what it was. And so those are by nature a little bit slower because you have to develop this character from a young age, unless you're writing it more for young adult or something. But in my experience in the classic format of the coming of age epic, it's just slower in pace. That's just how it is. You're slowly weaving in the background. And in my case, I had two different characters who needed to build and build and build until they sort of came together. So just by nature, it was slower. And this time with these stories, I was going for more of an adventure feel. And I didn't know how I was going to do that till I did it. More action, obviously. And this next story, I don't even know yet. I think it's fast. It's called Descending Dragon. I've talked a little bit about it with Mihir, but it's, It's the son of an innkeeper who sends into hell to save his friends. That's the whole story. And so that amount of plot in this book would fill like 2% of the Ash and Sand trilogy. You know what I mean? Like, it's so when you have that much plot, the pace is just going to be different.
Mhm.
And I'm experimenting. I guess that's the answer.
It's kind of funny, and I'm sorry I'm interrupting again if anybody else had a question. You're kind of going against the grain, sir, because most authors, and we have seen this in traditional publications as well. The publishers, the authors, they tend to stick to their genre. They'll experiment, like you said, like most authors do want to experiment, but the settings or the style stays the same. Whereas for you, it's distinctly different. And again, just an observation, nothing bad about that. But but do you think that readers... Do you think this will be helpful to gain new readers, or do you think you're pissing off readers who are already along you for the ride?
Another fine question. I guess ultimately, and I'm going to have to immediately walk this back after I say it, because it's not entirely true, but my initial reaction is I don't care. It's not that I'm saying I don't care if I piss off readers or something like that. Readers is how I can do this for a living, and I'm only really interested in what readers have to say, other than the very fine bloggers and writers that I've met is always very interesting. But it's because you're readers ultimately. That's why I'm interested in what you have to say. But I think readers, they like you or they don't. They like your books or they don't, and I just don't worry about that. I do what I find interesting. I don't write to the market, really. I don't try and pander. I just think, is this a good story and would I like to read it? That's all that really concerns me. And am I enjoying the process? Am I learning and growing and being able to, do I have another tool in my toolbox after I write it? And this current book that I'm writing is a perfect example. I thought writing in first person wouldn't be that big of a deal. Jesus Christ. It's very different. Mm-hmm. And so I don't know. We'll see. Am I going to have readers who have enjoyed the previous works? We have a guest.
Hello.
You want to wave? That's my daughter, Ava.
Oh, hi.
So I guess that's the answer. I don't really care. Ultimately, I do care in that I want readers to enjoy it, but I think they'll enjoy it if I don't worry so much about what other people think, and I do what I think is best.
But it's very important that you do this, because coming from your website, I was reading about the author before I read your books, and I saw you had different kind of jobs and really all over the place, and then suddenly decided I'm going to write. And now hearing you talk about you want to try something different and stuff like that, it feels like I know it's just a term, but multi-potentialism comes to mind, which means you have a million things you are interested in and that you are potentially good at, but it only happens when you set your mind to it. And if you've done something, you will automatically go to something else. You did the first trilogy with the Kings of Paradise and stuff. And now you're trying something different because it interests you. And that makes you, for me, a good writer. Because I have the same issue I get. I don't want to call it stale, but I get the feeling that sometimes I need something else in my life. And then I go for it. And then it gives me better results of feeling good at what I do or what I want.
Yeah, I mean, it's how you grow in life, and
Yeah.
But as I said, there's sort of that Sherlock Holmes conundrum where, yes, readers do often want, because there's so many books out there and there's so many things to get your attention. It's nice to say, okay, this is Stephen King, and I know what Stephen King is going to give me. That's what I'm looking for. I'm going to go pick up that. Now, he's maybe a bad example because he's shifted his. He's done lots of things too. He's sort of known for horror, but he's done other things. And so, readers sometimes would like to just pick up your book and think, I know what I'm going to get, which is why sometimes writers will do pen names or whatever, and they'll have different brands for different genres. maybe one day I'll do that sort of thing because, but I would, as long as it's fantasy, I think I'm just going to stick to my name, my brand.
Richard Nell.
If I do a true departure and I write a, thriller or a romance novel or something, then I'll make a new brand or something to that effect, because that's not beyond the pale. That's not beyond the possibility. I would like to write all kinds of things. So we'll see, but it's very difficult to do that and to do it well. Especially there's a lot of writers, it's funny, who look down sometimes on other genres. They might look down on romance books or, well, you just try and write one and then you see how you do. Every type of art has its own complexities and difficulties. And as I say, just moving to first person threw me for a loop. It's a very different style and you've got to get used to it.
Mm-hmm. The funny part one can say, Richard, is your brand is there is no brand. That can be your tagline.
You just never know what you're going to get. Yeah.
Yep, that's the thing.
But it'll be good.
Yeah, it'll be good.
So we'll keep our eyes out for that paranormal romance.
I have been telling him he should rebrand the Ash and Sand trilogy as like a quadruple romance, with Kale, Ruka, and Kale and Ruka's Dala, and one more person as like a quadrilateral romance story. It'll sell buckets.
God, I don't even know what to say to that.
Hey, just send me the money.
Might be true.
You don't need to say anything.
Yeah. All right. So I've heard Mihir. I've heard Joshua. What did you think of the book, Steve?
I liked it. I keep finding myself looking for ties to the Ash and Sand trilogy because I love it so much. So I'm always looking for something that connects it, and I have to just kind of just go with the flow because I'm constantly looking for ways that to connect the trilogy to the newer books. So but I think I did that more with Dark Sea's End, and I enjoyed it more when I just let it be what it was and didn't try to connect it so much and just let it flow. So
just be in the moment, man.
Yeah.
But no, I've already sort of let this cat out of the bag that the Ash and Sand world and the God King world is actually the same world. So all I've done is I've moved forward in time. So you might think of the Ash and Sand world as sort of the history, and I've moved the geography. So it's a fairly large world as well. So there's different continents, but they will interconnect. So that's why Steve is looking for the connections.
Yeah. And there was a quote that I was going to ask you about, or that. Well,
okay,
go ahead.
Shoot.
Go ahead. Yeah.
No, I want to hear it now.
It was so on page 83. How strange to think that one time he had in legend and record had kept since men of the East could read and write, and how strange to think that at one time they couldn't, that the God King himself had been illiterate. So I'm always looking for little breadcrumbs.
Yep. Yeah. Well, we'll get much more into the history of this world as time goes by, but we see that the technology has changed very quickly in this place over 300 years. And so the reasons for that are essentially different people found these people and brought them new technology. That's what began that transition.
Yeah.
And so that can change your society a huge amount. And especially when you have a sort of benevolent dictator who's immortal, who's creating peace and ushering in this sort of new golden age, bringing in all of the intellectuals and people he can to him. I'm not sure what happened to her mother. She's released the beast. And so the 300 years that this story covers, or that this...
Keeping us in suspense.
It's sort of very... It makes a huge difference to this world. And even in our own history, we can look at the world history and see this many times. What happens when some colonial power that has new technology arrives, and the effects of that on the civilization that they find there. So it's in essence, kind of a colonial story that then turns into a new kingdom.
Yeah, yeah. Lamb talks about it, or thinks about it at some point, about how he's lived 100 years and has fought in so many wars and had to use bow and arrow, and now it's all guns, guns, guns. So you can read it in the book as well. Yeah.
Yes, yeah. So this is a Lamorak, the Stone Knight, as they call him. Yeah. So even the characters of one of these stories, who's obviously not 300 years old, but he is older than a normal person. Some of these characters, so the world building is that they've got these demons that go inside of people, and they have different magic effects. So in this guy's case, I can't remember the name of the demon that's inside him. It's got I forget now, but Amondras maybe.
I'm not so good with names either.
Yeah. Who wrote this damn thing anyway? Yet one of the effects that it has is that it prolongs the life, and so this character is 150 years old, and he still looks like he's 35 or something like that. Mm-hmm. And yes, even when he was young, they didn't really have that many guns. And he describes a battle where they were up against a man they called the Powder Duke, who sort of for the first time really used a more modern army that had cannons and muskets and so on. And he'd never even seen them in his life. And he spent his childhood trained as an archer, essentially.
Yeah.
Richard, I have... Oh, sorry, go on, Joshua.
No. Here, go.
I had a question about this, because you're both these novellas. They are flintlock fantasy. They begin. You kind of get the first one, especially. It kind of begins like with a medievalist outlook. There's the squire, there's the knight, and everything. The second one is more so military oriented, but they're both flintlock fantasy. But then the key element, which is the surprise element for especially in new readers going in, is the presence of demons. And it's not just the demons, like they're scary on their own, but it's the way you describe it, the new colonial power that came in with this technological bit. The demons are kind of like the power of the atom, circa our world from 1945 onwards. Like it changed the whole world. It's kind of like that. What you do is that you inscribe these demonic essences and powers all throughout. It's not just for warriors, it's also for other people. Like, the whole outlook, the whole technology, like you described, in 300 years, like one of the characters remembers that he was just doing a simple archer, but now he's having to fight with with guns and everything. How did you conceptualize this? Like, because not only did you have to think about just the character wise, but also the world, worldview as well. How would these demons and the demonic essences and then the art of basically inscribing demons within your body, how did you think of it from a world building perspective? As a fan, as a reader, this was very fascinating because it was so well done.
I had the same question.
How did I come up with it? Writers hate that question because the answer is usually, I have no idea. Where do ideas come from? I don't know. They just kind of drift to us while we're busy washing the dishes, or if I had the answer to that question, I would I'd bottle it and I'd sell it. But as a general rule, all of my inspiration comes from being a lover of literature and reading, and then being an amateur historian, which is a grandiose claim, just a lover of history. So some combination of the two. And there's mythological elements. Tattooing, for example, has always been very powerful in different mythologies. So I'm sure I just sort of stole that from various. I've been reading for the Ash and Sand series, for example. I read a lot of Polynesian sort of style history, and this is very much a piece of their mythology. And like a character like a Maui or something, all of his deeds are written in tattoos on his body, and they come alive and they're magic and so on. So that was one piece of it. The next piece, in terms of the sort of demons as a technology, let's say, I've always been kind of obsessed with what makes, well, how do I put this? To become a truly useful individual, you have to be a little bit dangerous. If nobody's afraid of somebody who's harmless, you have to be dangerous and then controlled and civilized. So there's some theme there that obsesses me, and the demon aspect of it is sort of a piece of that, that they're extremely dangerous, but they're also extremely useful. And to sort of master them is, you have to be strong-willed enough, or you have to have some personal trait that allows you to overcome this dangerous thing. But once you have, you can employ it for good, essentially. And so that's what this God King has done, and that's what his collection of sort of knights have done. You almost think of it as the Knights of the Round Table, where the way that he has controlled this, because there's a whole bunch of these demons out there. But his method, or his, rightly or wrongly, his way to deal with this has been to essentially take complete control of it, very much like a dictatorship, and say the only people who shall have these demonic creatures are me and mine. Only him and his knights have these demons. He has them all sort of in a castle or a series of castles, and he controls them very tightly. He has this order of scribes, or people who their own sort of a priestly caste, you might call it, or so that's sort of the equivalent, who understand it and who have knowledge about it, and who help him and his knights sort of keep them under control. And if they escape, they hunt them down and bring them back. But nobody else is allowed to have them. But as we see in these stories, the elite of these societies have been so upset with this for so long that he's finally bent a little bit with the sort of a proclamation saying, okay, a certain level or certain rank of the creature is fairly low ranking. You can now have, if you've met these criteria, if you're a nobleman or if you're rich or whatever, you can sort of buy yourself a low-ranking demon if you follow the rules and submit yourself to the scribes and everything else. So that change is happening. So it's just a demonstration that he's losing his control a little bit. He's losing his grip on this commodified power. Now, I think I've more than answered the question that you're, but that's,
you went beyond.
Yeah. Just
But
stop me if I'm rambling.
No,
No.
it makes it even more interesting with all the idea around the knights and of a demon getting loose in the wild, that it can have a drastic effect on the whole hierarchy that the Demon King has built, as the God King has built. I thought, the first thing I thought when I read about the demons, I was like, it felt a lot. I don't know if you know the comic or the video game, The Darkness.
Mm-hmm. I'm not sure I do.
With the demon, a gangster, an American gangster, gets possessed by a demon and gets revenge. After he dies, he gets revenge on the whole mob, and he talks to this demon, and it gives him powers, but it tries to take over him. Yeah, his body over, and it remind me of that. So when, for example, in the second book, what was his name? Kurt is talking to the demon. I heard the voice from the video game, and I thought you had a link with that, but yeah, I guess I was wrong.
Yeah, so I should mention. So the situation with the demons I described, that's sort of one kingdom, and essentially they have, or at least they were believed to have, pretty much all of the demons have been captured by this God King and his knights, and they have a monopoly on this. The other story shows out there, and so that's what Kurt finds, and I guess I'm probably spoiling that story a little bit. But there are some other demons in this world, and one or two of them will be found here and there. So they're not all captured. They're not all dealt with.
All right.
And I know, Mihir and Steve have read the other books, and so they know quite a bit more than you about some of the origins of these things. But
I'm glad I can read this apart from the other books, and it didn't feel like I was missing something. But now hearing you guys talk about it, it's like, I really need to read the other books, but
Yeah, well, I guess that's the goal with these things. But
Mission accomplished.
yeah, well, there's much more to that story, and so I'm sort of playing when we get to the God King books. Even the way I've been describing this God King, he's sort of a dictator. He's like, I mean, that's what a king is. But much of the surrounding elite, especially in this society, are going to be very upset with him because he's controlled this society in the way that he's wanted to, more or less, for 300 years. People don't like that very much. It doesn't matter if you're benevolent or not. People like to have their own influence and control and so on. And so most of the book is going to show that everyone's sort of against this guy and that they're trying to upend things, as I say. But the reality is that he has turned a sort of dirt poor, barbaric land of chaos and just nastiness, as I say, almost illiterate tribesmen and all these difficulties, into a very functional, very productive and wealthy society where it's probably about as fair and about as just as any society in this entire world.
Sounds like novella too.
Yeah. So I don't have an answer to what do you do about this situation, but I'm playing with that. Let's put it that way.
We are going to find out.
Yes, and is that a good thing or a bad thing? Do you want a benevolent dictator or do you want chaos? I don't know. There's people who want different things, but what the second story, it's funny. Whenever I read reviews or I see people, nobody likes Kurt. Everybody thinks he's sort of a villain, but it's funny because for me, Kurt's got a special place in my heart. He's I don't know why. I always empathize with men who have nothing, with sort of blue collar, the forgotten men of history, the sort of the common who nobody gives a shit about, who are essentially even worse than that in a way, because the men of the story in The Devil of the 22nd, this is sort of a very historical situation that comes up quite a bit, that what you have is common men who have been trained up, who are very fierce warriors. But then suddenly you don't need them anymore. Maybe the war's over, or maybe, all the enemies around you are sort of currently pacified and you've sort of turned inward. So what the hell do you do with this group of sort of hard men who have been fighting and protecting your kingdom for an entire lifetime, let's say, and they're not noblemen, they're not going back to castles. They have been sort of free to do as they like for 20, 30 years, maybe. You've been putting them in situations that no person should be in for a week, let alone for 2 decades. And they have been utterly transformed by that experience. And we know PTSD, and we know what happens a little bit in the modern world, what happens to soldiers. But these guys, they're in a whole category of their own. They've seen just the worst, horrific, Iron Age sort of nastiness you can imagine. There's people trying to kill them their whole lives. Never mind the enemy, sometimes their own soldiers, and there's different factions. So, as I say, these men have sort of a special place in my heart where I feel a great deal of empathy for them. Maybe because where I live, it's sort of a blue collar, salt of the earth kind of a place, and there's a lot of people who serve in the military here. So I see them in my real life, and so I have empathy for Kurt, let's say, who's this man who's saying, well, fuck you, basically. Nobody wants me, and nobody wants me and my brothers, and we are going to do whatever we have to do to sort of build our own. Yeah, not only to survive, which is sort of how they normally think, but in his case, he's finally thought, not just survive, we're going to thrive. We're going to carve out our own little piece of the pie here, and using all the skills that you said were so necessary, our own people and the kings and the emperors and so on. You said we had to be like this, and so we are. Now we're going to use those skills to take what we want. And it's easy to see how that can make them kind of villainous, right? We can say, well, okay, they're pretty nasty guys. On the other hand, can you blame them?
Mm-hmm.
So I have a quick follow-up question about that. Richard, now the way you presented Kurt was, the situation which you presented was very true. But is it fair to say that Kurt is a bit sociopathic? Now, I realize we're using terms from our world to describe somebody from a secondary fantasy world. But the reason why I say this is because Kurt is not, and I apologize, I don't remember, because he's meeting the remaining generals. Do you really presented his line of thought amazingly well? You kind of see that he's in it for himself. Now, is it a product of his society, his upbringing, or it's just how he is? We don't really know. But Kurt's reasonings for what he wants to do, are not really truly for his men, but more so for himself. Would you say that it's fair, or would you say that
Well, I think that's fair. One thing the story probably doesn't do as well a job as I like to, and this is always very difficult when you're trying to get people into the heads of different cultures and so on, is that for the most part, that's how most societies and people in societies were, especially if you're in a society that's sort of not that wealthy. The more scarcity, the more in it you are for yourself. But most of human history, people have been in it for themselves and their families, right? It's sort of a very family-oriented past. That's the history of human beings. Is you're out for you and your brothers and your father and your house if you're a noble. But that's your blood essentially is what you're out for. And there's sort of an old Arabic saying that me and my brother against my cousin, and me and my cousin against a stranger, right? So that's sort of how people work. And if you are not from a noble family, if you are not from a family that matters, if you're a sort of a bastard child like Kurt is, where he's got no one who's ever looked out for him in his whole life, essentially. He has no parents, he has no family to speak of. And even the army that he's in is full of sort of cutthroats and criminals. That's often what armies get composed of in many of these situations. These are not noblemen, these are common men. He's never been given anything, basically. And even the men who call themselves his brothers, it's a very complicated relationship. On Tuesday, they're his brother. On Wednesday, they'll kill him for a chicken. I mean, that's just his situation. So he wants that brotherhood, and he wants, even though he wants it, and he sometimes shows that towards some of the men that he deems worthy, like Harmon, right? Who's even kind of like a rival in some ways, because they're fighting for influence in this army. But he also respects him, and he's been fighting at his side for decades. And he would basically trust this man with his life on the battlefield. But away from the battlefield, he might cut his throat. So it's a difficult situation to be in. So I guess that's what I'm trying to show, that it's complicated. But nonetheless, think of it in terms of me and Harmon against the world. Yes, if in the circumstances we have been in, we might be enemies occasionally. But now that they're looking for an excuse to kind of bind them together. If we have to fight the empire, if we have to fight everybody else, then we will be brothers at last, right? Truly, because we've got no one else, and we're going to need each other. And so that will bring them together, sort of.
Maybe it was just me, but both these novellas, to bring your point, with Kurt and with Lamorak, they're both very different characters. They're both, you would say, very good warriors. Maybe Kurt more so because he's a general. Lamorak is more of like a knight. But Lamorak had more of a heroic nature. You kind of don't sense that within Kurt. Even the scribe, because at first he doesn't really understand what's going on, and then he finally realizes who Lamorak is. But I like the dichotomy which you presented. Even in the first story itself, between the scribe and the knight, and you flip that because you kind of go in expecting something else, and then it turns out to be something else. But just to kind of draw that line, was this on purpose? Maybe when you wrote this novel, it's like that.
Oh yes, no. Kurt is not a heroic character by any means, and I think people recognize that when they, and that's one of the reasons he's probably disliked, because he's not heroic. He's heroes tend to die young. What Kurt is a survivor, and he has survived since the age of 14 I'm reminded of a quote: "Be wary of old men in a profession where people die young." That's Kurt. He's in a situation where usually people don't last, and that's the joke that his sort of second in command has him. He calls him old man. He's only like 35. But most of the soldiers in his situation, they don't make it more than a few years, maybe a decade. This man has lasted for 20 years, and that has made him kind of a legend in this unit, because they think that's what they call him, the devil, right? They think he's got some kind of devil's luck that he's survived so long. And he survived so long because he does not put himself in dangerous situations. He leads from the back. He doesn't lead from the front, as we see. He really has no interest in fighting. I think there's a quote from him where he says, "Killing I like, but fighting, no." He's happy to shoot somebody with a cannon, or to butcher them if they can't fight back. But he doesn't want to put himself in a situation where he's at risk. Essentially.
Yeah. It felt like he tried to push his luck a couple of times, and then in the end it was like, oh, this was all calculated. Should have known.
Yeah, mind you, he doesn't have the benefit that Lamorak does of being damn near invulnerable. So fair enough. Yeah.
Also,
I still blame you. You put both of these novellas together. We had to read Lamorak's story first, where you kind of see what happens, and how a good cat, like a good and heroic person he is, and then you get to Kurt's part expecting something different, and then you get to see Kurt in all of his true colors. So it's all your fault, sir.
I had some different feelings with the whole Lamorak character, though. It's not that he's a bad guy or a puppet because he's just doing his job. But there was a scene where they come up to the camp. So first, they find those 3 boys in the woods spying on them, and he does what he does, and he's like, they work for the enemy, they have to go. And the book took a turn for me at that point. Whoa, we're in it now. And then you come at the camp, and there are women and children, and they're washing, and they're doing their stuff. And suddenly he says, "Fire!" on the tents and everybody. And I felt like he took a page from General Custer's book, as in with the Cheyenne, like, women, children, doesn't matter, they're the enemy, they need to go. And at that point, I was like, wait, he's not a hero. He's just doing his job, basically. So I wasn't feeling the whole this is a good guy and Kurt is a bad guy. They were equally doing something that was correct for them. But that's how I felt about it.
I really like that you've raised that point. It's complicated again, and I guess if we're going, what do I write? What's the theme of my stories? I guess I try and write at least complicated stories of morality, because especially when you're talking about war, right? I mean, there's always collateral damage. It is always hell. You can start a war with the best of intentions. You can think, I'm just going to kill the enemy soldiers, and if anybody surrenders, I'm going to let them surrender. And you can walk in with whatever morality you think you're going in. And it's sort of like, what's that Mike Tyson quote? Everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the face.
Yep.
As soon as you start getting punched in the face, you realize that you just can't stay to your plan. And especially, I tend to write stories. In this case, you've got 2 soldiers, essentially, right? Lamorak and Kurt. they've both spent a lifetime at war. And it really, if you've ever known people who have spent years fighting, they become numb, to the horror. It's just collateral damage. It's just how it is. And on the one hand, I remember watching a movie. I can't remember the name of the movie now. It's going to bug me, but it shows American soldiers in some campaign in a Middle Eastern country. And they get
Jarhead?
to it's not Jarhead. Anyway, it might come to me as I go here, but essentially they've got some special forces mission where they're trying to take out a target, and they get spotted by some local kid, basically. It's like a goat herder or, just some normal kid. And you can just see the soldiers kind of freeze. And they're going, okay, what do we do? Either we tie him up and he's going to die in the mountains here. Do we put a bullet in him? Do we let him go? And he maybe runs down and tells the enemy that we're here.
Lone survivor.
I think that's what it is. Yeah. And I think they make the decision to let him go.
Let him go. The goat herder.
And he runs straight to the enemy and says,
Yeah.
there's these special, and almost all of them die. The one guy gets whatever.
Yeah,
So-
true story. Yeah.
Yeah, so that kind of thing happens all the time in real war, where you're going, well, look, there's a local and they've seen us. What do we do? So that's what happens to Lamorak, basically. He's saying, look, the scout found us, and either I kill him or I let him go.
Yeah.
And if I let him go, he may run straight to the enemy, and he may say, because basically they're coming under the guise of darkness, they've marched quickly. He expects to surprise these guys. He's got an inexperienced force. If they don't ambush them, he's thinking, well, I might lose all these young soldiers that I've just trained for the past 2 weeks. So it's not that he's doing it out of villainous. He's making a very cold, calculated military decision, saying,
Practical.
I cannot permit these scouts to escape and give away my position. I'm going to kill them, and it'll save the lives of my men. So that's the decision he's made, basically.
Well, Tywin Lannister would approve of that. Just
Yeah.
as would most generals, like most actual history generals would approve of that. Like that the ultimate objective of war or any battle is to win, and if you have to do certain horrible things, again,
Yes.
not condoning or okaying with that, just saying what is history has taught us as well.
Yes. Now, what I would say, this is, I guess, my opinion, which is probably matches yours somewhat, is that he probably could have tied them up and just taken them with him. Because, that wouldn't have been a huge problem. He's got an army of a few hundred men. They've got some wagons and so on. So I don't think that would have been an issue. But he's probably, as I say, he's 100 years old. He's been fighting battles he's cold. He's become cold and ruthless, and he probably hardly even considered it. It's just, this is an enemy. He's compromised my position. Kill him, and that's that.
Gert makes basically the same decision when they get to the village with the barbarians.
Though, yes, in his case, he comes from a culture that's fairly racist and sort of arrogant, culturally superior. He thinks nothing of these barbarians in a way. They're sort of lesser, and they've been trying to kill him for most of his life, and so he thinks of them all sort of vicious, uncivilized beasts. And so that is quite different than Kurt, who he thinks of these boys more or less as his countrymen, really.
Yeah.
Though in his case, I would say he's so disgusted by the betrayal. I think there's a quote there where he's sort of saying, like, look, you've betrayed your king, and your king is sort of the best man I've ever encountered in my life, and everybody else, comparatively speaking, is so the fact that you'd betray your king makes you a traitor and an enemy, and that's that. So he's sort of a old school chivalric, you've broken your oath, and for that you deserve whatever's coming to you, even if you're 14, which I would say is pretty harsh. But
Yeah, I was just saying, same decision, different point of view.
yeah.
Richard, another question, maybe because again of the presence of demons, and how much, again, this is your author's viewpoint, but how much do you think for these characters, because they have been utilizing these demonic essences. They're basically capturing the demon within them, as you had mentioned. Like, the demons are captured by these individuals, knights, so as to speak. How much of their thinking or their behavior is influenced by the demons vis-a-vis these warriors, not even realizing that, thinking that, like you mentioned, Lamorak has this demon for 100 years. He becomes cold. It could be the war, it could be PTSD, but it also could be the demons influencing him to become more and more inhumane, so as to speak.
Yes, well, I mean, I guess you're asking from my perspective, but these sorts of things I ultimately like to leave to the reader to decide. Basically, I think of was it a Nietzsche quote? He says, "When you look into the abyss, it looks back." It's. I think in most things in life, we are all very affected by, when you're a kid, you're quite naive, right? You've usually, unless something has gone wrong in your family life, you're being quite protected. You don't encounter people who lie. You don't encounter people who engage in violence and who are looking to harm you. And you go through life as a series of waking up to it's a darker place than you've realized, and better place too. People can be incredibly good, and there are living saints in this world as well as psychopaths. And so you realize that as you get older, that there are people out there who look to harm you, and there's what you can think of as almost nothing but just evil in the world, and that exists. That's a reality. And then the
oh darn it, we're losing with all the interesting points.
question is, what do you because there's evil people in the world, I'm going to become like that too? Do you think I'm going to reject that utterly? Do you think, how do you respond to that is largely the making of a human being. It's sort of the old Solzhenitsyn quote that the line between good as evil runs through every human heart. So my demon for me is really just a representation of someone who is dancing with the devil a little bit closer than the average person. And so how do they respond to that? It really is a test. And that's why these scribes and the characters who hold these demons, it's truly a test of will. And in the case of Kurt, he's able to take this demon and control it. I'm implying, I guess, because his life of darkness has prepared him. This demon enters him, and it's this dark creature, and it's thinking, I'm this horrible thing, and can you withstand me? And he's thinking, that's all you've got? That's a Wednesday. So it can't sort of consume him. And in the case of Johann, he's prepared his whole life for this. He sort of knows what it's going to be like. So he's been sort of mentally and spiritually prepared, I guess, whatever you want to call it. And so and they pick people who they think are going to be able to withstand it. What makes somebody capable of withstanding darkness? That's sort of up to you to decide. I guess we can look at history and say, what are the people who, when they get a little bit of power, we think power corrupts, right? There's people who can take power and they can behave quite well with it, right? As I say, a benevolent dictator or something. That's quite rare, I would suggest. But there are people who can have power and behave well. And then there's people who become a police officer, and just with that amount of power, abuse it horribly. So what is the difference between that cop who abuses it and that guy who would fight to the death to protect an innocent person? I don't know. But it's a difficult question.
Mm-hmm. All right.
Go ahead.
Should we ask more questions about this novella, or can we pivot to something else?
Sure.
What do you think, Steve?
Mihir's just been waiting.
It's all you.
Just one more, just to say, I love the one scene. I knew it was coming, and yet I still, when Johann grabs the gun, turns around. Matrix, excellent. If that was intentional, as in a reference to, excellent. If it wasn't, it was still a great scene. So.
Yes, well, I think we've probably moved it long past spoiler territory. I have no idea if I don't know really, but I thought that I'm always amused by things like that. Whenever you read those scenes in movies where like the epic moment where somebody's about to, they've got the magic sword or they've got the gun or
If it works, it works.
yeah, I love it when it just goes disastrously wrong. There's just something about that that's I just love that. Like, oh, he's just failed miserably.
I was half hoping, click. Oh,
Backfire or something.
yeah.
I was thinking about that originally because I was going to lead up to that where he was terrified of the gun backfiring, and then it does, but I thought it was too far. It's like blows his hand off or something,
Oh, missed opportunities.
Yes, yeah.
Or a learning point for Johan, just service with Lamorak.
I think we can agree it went fairly rough for him, anyways.
Yeah.
He did, but he learned something. He learned something about the world. He learned something about himself. And will you be continuing any more explorations of these prequel novellas similar to the God King legacy?
Good question. I certainly had thought them out. I think I've said this quite a few times, but I'm a plotter, not a pantser, and so I've got a fully formed story essentially of another knight who escapes the God King's tower, and Lamorak and Johan, who are now in an established partnership, shall we say, are sent to track her home, and bring her home.
Mm-hmm.
So there's that story is ready, but I just haven't written it, and it's sort of there's an amnesia aspect where this character who escapes the castle forgets who she is essentially over and over. She has this very powerful demon inside her. And so she wanders away from the castle and she's sort of standing on a beach somewhere thinking, who the hell am I and how did I get here? And she's found by some nefarious sort of pirate type character who manages to convince her that she's part of his crew. He sort of lures her on board and she becomes a pirate. And she's sort of so powerful that she can leap 50 feet from one ship to the next ship and slaughter everyone on board. And so she becomes this kind of infamous pirate. And that's when, as soon as she's lost, she's, the God King knows she's gone. But so these characters are sent to bring her home. But again, it's a problem because she's a very powerful knight, essentially. And yeah, the shenanigans ensue. How do they get her back on board and convince her she's really supposed to be back in this castle and her life is more or less being trapped in prison because as soon as she escapes, it's a big problem. And so
I'm sold. Dates, prices. That's all I need now.
yeah. Well, I don't know. I need another person. I need like a ghostwriter to. I'll tell him the story. Okay, write it.
James Patterson. You need to get in touch with James Patterson.
Yes, I do.
Hear he has an army of them.
There's a writer in the comments, so maybe ask him.
Yeah, that's our friend P.L. Stewart from the John Kingdom. Page 2.
Oh, okay. Oh, I didn't realize. So I watched. I've seen some of your interviews, Steve. I didn't realize he was a writer. Okay.
Yeah. And Richard's work is on my TBR. Looking forward to it. Blame Steve. He's been influenced a lot of my reading choices lately.
Well, that's the goal, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
So yes, to answer your question, I would like to write some more of those novellas. I have some other half-formed stories, let's say, similar stories like that, where you've got these sort of characters sent out to solve a problem. But will I get to them? I don't know. I've got like 6 books I need to write. So,
which kind of brings me to another question, but I'm going to hold off until Steve and Josh ask. I'm going to shut up for now.
No, go ahead. Go for it.
Well, Richard's going to hate me for asking this, but how goes, how after Dark Seas and what you wrote was, it was the beginning of the Beyond Ash and Sand trilogy, sir. It was a fantastic book. Any progress updates or anything to tell fans who are, waiting for book 2 and book 3 maybe?
Yeah, well, so I'm writing a side project. I don't know. It's not related to these books at all. And it's called Descending Dragon. And I'm very nearly done. It will be out this year for sure. And it's not, I've sort of described a little bit already, progression fantasy, first person characters going down into hell. So that's next. Then I will loop back and go to Beyond Ash and Sand #2. I'm already working on it sort of peripherally. There's lots of little things that I've done here and there, but the actual writing of the book is sort of on the back burner waiting for me to finish this book. So that'll be next. That'll be next year. And then I think I'm going to finish that series because it'll be a trilogy. And then hopefully I'll get to the God King stories.
So the third trilogy begins, or series begins.
Yeah, that's the plan. Maybe I will jump back to do another of these progression books, side projects, which, was supposed to be short and fast and take me 6 months. I don't know why I ever thought that I would be able to do that. And what, but I'm trying to get these palate cleansers, like, okay, I've been in this world for 5 years, something like that. And so I try and jump into something else just to do something totally different. But then it got more complicated. And of course. And now this side project.
In over your head.
Could definitely.
Dreads.
But yeah, that book is coming. There's no question.
Awesome.
And I'm excited to get to it because for fans of the Ash and Sand trilogy, there will be more Ruka, and he will be a point of view character.
Ooh. You preempted my question.
What's that?
You preempted my question because
I think I spoiled something for Joshua already.
No. I'm missing out again. That's all I'm feeling now.
Yeah. Well, this is a character you'll experience a lot if you read the Ash and Sand books, and the only problem with
Ruka.
the only problem with these next books is that I guess certain characters are alive.
Or are they?
Mm-hmm.
It could be in the past, or who knows?
I read so many things and watch so many things. It's
I
when I was younger, I would have said, I'm not reading that anymore because I'm spoiled. But if I want to read something, I'm going to read it.
Yeah.
Oh, there's so much that so much in that trilogy.
You're in for a treat, Joshua, because you get to experience like 3 books within back to back to back, and then after the trilogy ends, you can also jump into Dark Season, which is, a continuation, like Richard said, in the same world. But again, I'm not going to reveal if it's in the past, future, whenever.
It's something I try to do with if I buy books. I hate to have to stop something.
I was going to ask you guys actually, how big a deal is it for you for this series to be finished?
Depends on the writer, maybe.
Yeah.
For me, at least, it depends on the writer. Like, if I know a writer is going to be, of course, everybody writes differently. Nobody's super quick. Some writers are, some writers aren't. It depends for me. Like, if it's from you, I know eventually it's going to come out. I'm going to read it. I'm going to love it. That's a different story. If it's George R. R. Martin, Scott Lynch, I have kind of given up on them. But I'll still read their books when they release them. It's just a little bit worrisome that, given their past track record. Pat Rothfuss, I'm no longer going to read any of his books just because I don't know what he's doing.
Yeah, I struggle because I sympathize with George Martin and I sympathize with Patrick Rothfuss because I guarantee they would like to finish the books and series. On the other hand, I'm with readers. Unfinished stories make me very angry.
Mm-hmm.
I think human beings are just like that in general. So you have a kind of, and I hear writers say this, like, I have no obligation to finish this. I disagree. I think if you have said it's going to be a series, you've made a implicit promise. Otherwise, don't write a series. I mean, just wrap it up in one book and leave it at that. Yeah. Now, there are market forces that are causing these problems. So there again, I sympathize. But I think at the end of the day, what we're dealing with a little bit is a problem with the industry. We're dealing with a problem with the publishing industry who's pushing for these series, and that's been their business model for a long time. But that doesn't make it right.
No.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I mean? And so now that we have this new indie world, there's guys like me who are saying, well, you don't have to do that. Don't force it. Either say you've got a series in you and do that, or if you don't. Otherwise, you are, as I say, you're breaking a promise, an implicit promise. You really are, and it pisses readers off. It hurts all of us as writers. It hurts all of us as genre writers. Like fantasy and can get a bad name, right? If everybody's doing that over and over again, people are like, well, fantasy writers never finish their goddamn stories. So I'm going to read, sci-fi or whatever, or I'm going to play a video game. It's just not good.
Yeah.
But it's the same problem as in. So as I said, I wait till a trilogy or whatever, how many books it is. I wait till it's finished, and then I buy everything because I'm certain that it's finished and I can read nonstop. But at the same time, I sympathize with the writers or the creators of whatever medium it is, because I love video games and I want my games finished. I want the stories finished, not that they're under pressure by the publishers to bring something out that is, I'm going to hit this,
Yeah. Yeah, it's a tricky thing.
And Peel had a question. Do you feel, Richard, that there is an ideal length for a series?
I think trilogy. I never can see myself writing something longer than a trilogy. I think, thesis, antithesis, synthesis. You're saying this, or maybe this, or maybe both. That's sort of how stories are designed to work in my mind. Whereas if you're telling a story that's more than 3 books, you better have a really good goddamn reason. And there's very few fantasy writers in my experience who have a good enough reason to do it. Yeah. Malazan, my apologies to Philip Chase.
You monster.
It might, I'm treading carefully. It might have a good enough reason to be more than 3 books. George Martin, maybe, but even he, to be perfectly honest with you, because at the end of the day, you have to ask, what is the book or the series trying to do or doing? In the case of George Martin, he's trying to say the undead are coming. All of this stuff about the Game of Thrones is completely irrelevant. It is a waste of time. You're fighting amongst yourself over nothing. You need to stop the undead or we're all going to die. Right? That's the story of Song of Ice and Fire. Do you really need 5 books of this is a complete waste of time? You need to stop the undead. Do you? I'm not so sure.
Well, if it was until book 3, like A Storm of Swords, I would have said yes. After reading the middle 2 books, like Feast for Crows and Dance of Dragons, I'm kind of with you. It's more publisher demand, and of course, George being the writer that he is, because everybody of us has heard this thing about him saying that I'm a gardener versus an architect, and he's a gardener, and basically he just writes what he wants, and then he has to backtrack and go back and forth, which I think has led to this bloat, which is hard for him to now even control.
Yeah, so I'll just address. PL. Is that there's a difference between a series and serialized. In other words, like if you got Star Trek Enterprise or something like that. Okay, every episode is sort of self-contained. Every season, it doesn't really matter. You're not connecting the story from one to the next. You may have things that run through it, but you're not. So if you're talking about the Sharp series, for example, it's essentially serialized. It's this is Richard Sharp. This is what he is. His rank may increase every season or every book or whatever it is, but you pretty much know what you're going to get. It's like reading Sherlock Holmes or something like that. In which case, as far as I'm concerned, you can continue it forever. There might be a natural stopping point at something. He's like, oh, he's a colonel now, or he's, what am I? I got to stop this at some point. But so that's totally different, and I think there's things that can go on forever, and I have no problem with that. But if it is a plot which has an obvious sort of beginning, middle, end, you got to wrap it up. I mean, you got to wrap it up so you can start a new story, and it can be in the same world, and it can be, whatever you want. You can expand on it, but a character, you've got to wrap it up. I don't know. People like conclusions.
Yeah. And Malazan does find its way into every discussion. No, it always finds a way somehow.
And just to add a point to PL's comment, especially because he mentioned a couple of things, Dresden Files, which is also urban fantasy, which the genre dictates is like, Richard, like you mentioned, each book is kind of its own story. It ends. Yes, there is a carry forward of the rank of the character, so as to speak, or the power increases, especially in Dresden Files. People who read Dresden Files know this, that the character of Harry Dresden begins as like a low on his luck, a private investigator wizard. And as a series, right now it's on, I think, 15 books or so. Wow. It is. He's gone to a different level. That's the nature of urban fantasy books. Similar to like that, the historical fiction Sharp series. It's a series of adventures that the character Sharp encounters in different parts of the country, different parts of the timeline. Similar to that, it's again the same thing with the mystery thriller genre as well. You have these long-running books, 30 books long, 20 books long, but they're again the same thing. You can pick up a book, read it, and then not choose to not read the next book of the series, and that's fine. But yeah, to Richard's point, it's not the same in fantasy. You need to have like a lot more. Steve, what do you think?
Yeah, I should caveat this by saying we're talking about fiction. There's no rules. Anything you can get away with, go ahead. This is just sort of my experience. Most writers in most stories can't get away with, don't need that many books. But there are writers who can do it, and there are stories that can handle it. And again, Song of Ice and Fire is a good example that he's obviously pulling it off. I mean, people love these books, and I love those books. But the writer in me is going, dude, wrap this shit up. I don't know why. I'm like, why? Why am I reading about Dorne? I don't care. Wrap this shit up. And I think the reason that he got himself into so much trouble is because he's, as I say, he's not doing that. He's got this tree, his garden is blooming in 75 different directions. And he's like, I don't know how to pull it in. I don't know how to get back to why he's realizing that Dorne does not matter. And he doesn't know how to bring it back into the story and say, why did I do all of this? To a satisfying sort of conclusion without just like dropping plot lines left and right. And readers being like, why the fuck did you, why did,
I think what also doesn't help is that, his ego, and considering where the TV series has ended, the TV series ended so badly that people now are expecting him to do a miracle. And of course, it's his own ego as well. He has to tie them into a satisfactory conclusion, which he can accept as a reader.
Yeah, I don't think he's a very, egotistical guy. Maybe that's not, it's probably not what you mean. I just mean he wants to make people happy. He's trying to satisfy his readers, and he's trying to finish, that series is a masterwork. It's a brilliant work of fiction, but it got away from him, I think.
Yeah, and when I said ego, I mean his own writing style. It has to make sense to him, to his own person before he sends it out. And I think that's where it's stopping right now. It's not making sense. He cannot wrap it up satisfactorily, and the TV show is this massive problem that everybody knows what's supposed to happen. So
yeah, it's sort of like your what's the expression? Your reach exceeds your grasp. It's and this is probably what happened to Patrick Rothfuss too. He's probably thinking he was going to turn this into a series, but it wasn't really a series. And so he's expanded on his first book, and he's expanded in ways that he doesn't really know the themes. He doesn't know what he's trying to do anymore. And it's like, well, how do I wrap up something that I don't even know what I'm trying to do? And so this is why, as a plotter as opposed to a pantser, this is why pantsers terrify me. Because for me, I come up with the conclusion, right? I know what I'm trying to get to. And so then I'm working to the conclusion. And so when I run into problems, my problems are always, how do I get out of this particular situation? Or what do I do because this character has sort of organically not done what I need him to do. You know, he's being an intransigent, obstinate little son of a bitch, and I need him to go to like this new area. But what is obviously the case, he wouldn't do that. You know, I've realized that the character. So that's my problem. But Pantsers, when they have a problem, their problem can be, I'm 75% through the novel, and I've realized that it actually is not working and has no point. And it's like, Jesus Christ, I'm too lazy. I'm not willing to waste 75% of a book, you know, having written that much, to not like know that the book is going to work and that I'm going to get to that ending. You know, I need that conclusion. I'm just too terrified that that's going to happen to me. So my hat is off in a way to Pantsers, because it's like they're way more courageous than I am. I'm not sure if it's laziness or lack of courage, but I'm not willing to get that far into a book without knowing that it's going to work. You know,
it's frustrating for readers though when that happens, because as the case with George R.R. Martin's fans, Scott Lynch's fans, Patrick Rothfuss's fans, they're just waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting.
Yeah. Well, PL, it pisses me off both as a reader and a writer. You know, it comes at me from two angles, because I'm like, dude, you're killing me here. Finish it. You're making us all look bad. You got to do it.
Yeah.
I'm gonna say something that's not really popular. It's about a writer who had the end product in her sights, and I'm still not there. I'm not there yet, but Robin Hobb, she had an idea, and I believe it works. Her character writing, I'm not talking about that, because she is one of the best character writers I have ever read. But the story, like the first trilogy, I've read the Farseer trilogy, that could have been one book. I'm sorry. That's my feeling about that.
I sort of knew you were going to go there, actually.
It felt like filler, more to talk about. And that's okay if you like characters, because her character work amazing. But I lost track of the story, and I felt bad afterwards that I dropped the series. I'm rereading now with the Live Ship Traders trilogy. Way better. And it gives me insight on what she was working to with the last book of the trilogy. No spoilers for that, but it just felt like it could have been shorter. It shouldn't have been the whole shebang, as in, I don't know how many books it is.
16.
16. Yeah.
I think 5 trilogies, if I'm not wrong, or 4.
It was one quadrilogy, I think. And when you said like
Soldier's Son, maybe.
Martin should have been. It should have been shorter. I have that feeling with Robin Hobb, but that's not a popular opinion.
Yeah, well, as I say, with fiction, there's no rules. You know,
of course.
Anything you can get away with, go for it. And there's sort of stylistic choices. I'm with you. I assume this comes across in my writing. I guess I'll leave that up to you. But I tend not to linger. You know, The plot moves pretty quickly. But there are writers who, you know, like Tolkien, for example. And that, you know, you said you had an unpopular opinion. Well, just wait. I almost hated reading 50 to 60% of those books. You know, I was bored. I was like, Jesus Christ, if you talk about this wizard druid character in the middle of the forest, you know, for one more page, I'm going to lose my mind. There's so many things in those books that it's just so slow. To me, it's agonizing in the description. But I recognize that it's beautiful description and that there are people who absolutely love it. And so what am I going to say? I mean, if you read Moby Dick, he goes on for 25 pages about hunting whales and the characteristics of whales and
it's tough defending descriptive writing. Yeah,
so it's just sort of stylistic and people's preferences. I personally don't like it that much. I spend as little time as possible describing how things look, for example, because I'm not really interested. For me, the imagination sort of does that. I don't need to say this guy's got flowing locks of black hair and it curled around his ear, and I just, I leave most of that to the imagination. But there are people who really love that stuff, and they want to know how things look and how things taste, and the feeling of the warm wind, and I just don't do that. But to each his own there.
That's how you get 7 books, or at least 5 books in a 7-book series from George R. R. Martin, right? He describes the foods, the doors, everything.
Yeah.
And that's one thing I don't know about Steve. Are you a descriptive reader, or do you like descriptions or?
No, like Stephen King drives me crazy for that, because he'll go on for pages about a bank sign that has no. I don't care about the bank sign or how hot it is or what it looks like.
Stops the momentum.
Nothing to do with the story. Let's move on. Don't waste my time. I don't like all these side tangents and all this extra crap. I don't care.
Though that is sometimes for horror writers, they're sort of putting you, is this important? Is this important? And then that thing you weren't paying attention to just killed that dude. So there's an element of misdirection there that sometimes you're like, why am I reading about this stupid sign or whatever? I'll just say that is a device.
And PL does have 20 books planned, and he wonders how Joshua was talking about Hob is Mihir read.
I gave up on Hob though, PL. Like, I could only survive 2 books, and I realized Robin Hobb is not. She writes the type of books for her fans. It's just not for me. Like, I realized that, and I'm like, okay, good for her. It's just not meant for me, so I backed off. That's why I don't have anything to say about Robin Hobb. I realize she writes really well, but just not for me.
Yeah. There you go.
Yeah.
It's so funny how some people love slow and really descriptive, and some want quick and dirty. Both work. It's all about preferences.
Yeah, well, it's frustrating if you're a writer and a whole bunch of people really love a book, let's say, and then you'll go read the book thinking, okay, how do I, what are the things that this writer is doing to get people to love this book? And then you read it and you're like, I hate this goddamn book. Because you're thinking, well, how all these people love this book, and here I am reading it to try and figure out what to do to get people to love my book, but I hate it. What does that mean? What is this? Do I just not know what other people like? Do I hate the things other people, and it's sort of difficult.
They treat me like that with Cassandra Clare.
Okay.
Just sorry.
Yeah. So as a reader, you're sort of thinking, just not for me, and you toss it away. But as a writer, you're going, wait, how do I reproduce something I don't like? And what are they doing that I'm not, am I missing something? Or you have to try and analyze it like that. I don't know. Difficult.
Yeah, absolutely. But Richard, going back to this point which you just brought up, do you think it has something to do with just your writing style? Because there are certain writers even which you love. David Gemmell, for example, he was not descriptive. He had a plot in mind, he had scenes in mind, and he would get to them and he would leave the readers to fill it in with the rest of the things, and that worked for a lot of people as well. But if you were to learn from him, or if you were to learn from Robin Hobb for that matter, but if you're not that type of writer, what do you do then in that regards?
Well, there are so many things you can do. And I love to talk about the craft of writing, but most people will immediately start snoring, and it's not that exciting for the average person as a general rule, I find. But there are many things you can do. There is a great deal of craft to writing. And you have to learn that if you want to become a writer, which maybe is obvious, but it's funny these days. The attitude is sort of like, well, it's all just preference, and if it's not your thing, it's not your thing. And it's like, well, do you like stories written by 2-year-olds? No? Why not? Shouldn't that just be a preference thing? No, because the 2-year-old does not know how to create tension. The 2-year-old does not know how to create all of these different emotions that you have to try and figure out as you master the craft of writing, just by reading and by doing it. And you can read books on it and all kinds of things. So you have to employ these tactics, and you can't employ them all. So you're making choices. And a lot of writers can get in trouble by trying to employ too many, and you're trying to do too many things. And I feel like I'm doing that right now with my current book that needs some editing. Because are you making them laugh? Are you making them cry? What are you doing? But yeah, it's a very difficult tightrope to walk, and there's all kinds of things to say about it. But that's why I say anything you can get away with. And there are writers that just through their abilities, their talents, and their skill and experience can get away with much, much more than writers who just can't. And George Martin can usually. He's a great master of the craft, and so he's written in all kinds of different genres. I usually use the example of oh Lord, now why can't I think of her name? The Harry Potter writer,
J.K.
Rowling.
Yeah.
She has tried to branch out of her stories, and I think basically failed. So she has discovered that she does not have the tools, and fair enough, she hasn't been writing that long, and she hasn't done that many things really. But it's hard. It's just very hard to do it. And so being able to write a fantasy story for children is very different than writing a thriller for adults.
Yep.
Yeah, but she's using a different name now, like you said in the beginning. That's what you would do if you write something else.
Yeah, but I just mean that it's clear that she's not a master of writing thrillers.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, and I've read some of those books and so on. They're fine, but I don't think Patterson's got to worry. So that's just how it is, right? I mean, and it's very difficult to do that, and people take it for granted. And sometimes writers will get stuck in their ways, and they won't keep trying to grow, and they won't keep trying to learn how to use these tools. And it's always a mistake. You have to go into these things with humility. Even if you've written 5 books, even if one of them has been wildly successful, doesn't mean anything. What can you produce on your next book? It's sort of, you're only as great as your next book, as the saying goes. It's true of musicians. It's true of writers. And if you don't, maybe Tom Cruise is a good example. An actor who just made this wildly successful Top Gun movie. Well, if you listen to him, here's a man who understands. Just because I'm a wildly successful actor doesn't mean the next project's going to be successful. And he was terrified of making the next Top Gun movie because he thought, I wasn't sure if I could do it. And he wasn't going to do it until he knew he had the technology to make the shooting of these planes right, and that he had the right actors and the right director and the right music, and you could just tell that he knew how to do it right.
Haven't seen it yet.
I have no idea, to be honest.
Yeah, I have no idea where it fits in.
Malazan belongs in its own warren.
Yeah.
All I gotta say, Paul, is I hope you drop it, and join me on the not for me Malazan side.
Yeah.
You can just hear the seething from the Malazan fans, like, burn him.
I tried 5 books into the Malazan series. That's it. 5 books.
That's all anyone can expect.
That's a lot.
That's a lot, indeed.
I also had lots of time back then, so
that's the only reason I'm getting through this.
I read 1 page. If you haven't hooked me in 1 page, I'm out.
Mm-hmm.
The pressure is real. What have you done for me lately is real.
Yeah, and that doesn't mean you can't be a fan of the former works of the person, but that's not going to be a reason for people to keep reading your stuff. You can't rest on your laurels. It just doesn't work, because we have and this is a good thing, we have so many options. We can go pick up. There are more writers writing today, more musicians, more video game designers, more everything you can imagine than ever in the history of humanity, and the quality is so good. There's a lot of trash too, but you can find excellent examples in every genre and every. So why would I waste, in the case of Malazan, 5 books trying to figure out if I like your story? No, I'm reading 1 page, and if I don't think I like it, you're out.
That's the fastest throwing away of Malazan I've ever heard in my life.
He missed me about doing
Not if you want to riot on your hands, Paul. Not if you want to riot. I am not a Malazan fan. I'm the worst person to talk about Malazan because I'll be just like, what? So never mind. So
Yeah.
I'd rather gladly talk about Richard's books because those are much more fun for me.
So I've said my thing is 1 page. How long do you guys? How far into a book will you go? Let's assume that nobody has recommended it to you. There's nobody sort of relying on you. You're not going to disappoint anybody. Let's put it that way. It's a completely new book. You've just pulled it off of Amazon because you like the cover or something like that. How far in do you go before you go, nah?
Steve?
Yeah.
I've gone. There's a couple of books that I've just tried, and a few pages in, I just knew it wasn't for me, and I just close it, or I'll skip ahead a little bit. I'll read ahead, and I'll just kind of peek at some pages and try and get a feel for what happens, and I just say it's not for me, and just move on. But sometimes I'll give it longer if I can kind of see where things are going or they're building to something. Then I'll give it longer. But there's been a few that I've a few pages in, and it's just not my cup of tea.
Joshua, what about you?
Well, I'm the worst one of everything in this again. I'm pretty hardcore when it comes to I just buy something, as you say, from Amazon or wherever, and then I do not stop reading the book until it's finished, until the whole series is finished, and so I can tell you to your face that it's bad or it's good or I didn't like it. My wife once said, "You have to watch Gilmore Girls. It's amazing. All those movie references and everything." I have watched the entire series of Gilmore Girls just to say that it was bad.
That's commitment.
You're a completionist.
Yes, I am. Mihir?
Well, before the birth of my kids, that's why I read 5 books in the Malazan. I could do that. I had the time to spare, and I had the mental energy to be like, no, I got to figure out what's exciting about these books, for so many people. Now it's 4, 5, 6 chapters, and similar to what Steve said, there are some books which you can get a sense of like, this is not just for me. Like, you just the writer's style or maybe the writer's descriptions or whatever, it's just not for you, and then you realize and you're like, okay, this is not for me. But I would still like to give at least 5 chapters worth. If they're longer chapters, even better, because then you kind of get a sense of what the author's trying, and all of that. But yeah, I think it all has to do with time. If you have the time, if you have the mental bandwidth, then yes. If not, then maybe sometimes, like Richard said, even in 2 or 3 pages, you're like, okay, this is not for me. And that's totally our thing.
Yeah, well, and I should maybe clarify that page or 2, 3 pages is probably more accurate, but not very far. There's a lot of different things that will get me to give you a longer chance. It doesn't have to be perfection for me to be like, okay, I will continue. There's just got to be a hook. Maybe it's the writing itself, or maybe it's the prose, maybe it's the setting, or maybe it's the the plot or something. There's got to be something that gets me to think, all right, either I'll give this a chance, or, oh, that's great, can't wait to continue. But if there's nothing, if it's just sort of like the wind howled in the trees, if you start with settings, usually I'm already like, I'm probably out. If the first line of the book is there was shadows and there was the trees were howling in the woods, and there's the character picked up the dishes and he started doing them, I'm like, oh Christ, man, that's that is just not going to do it for me. But if there's like a knife sitting on the dash and somebody staring at the knife and staring at their wife or something, I'm like, okay, you've got me, right?
Intrigued.
Like, what's going on here? Or if you have a great line, like it was the end of the world and my story was just beginning, or something like that, like some line that's going to get me to think, all right, there's something to the story that I can sink my teeth in. You're a trickster. I can tell you're going to be able to pull me back and forth and weave this in. But if it's just boring and the character doesn't grab me, and like maybe I'm over belaboring the point here.
No.
So what about for you guys? What is it that will get you? Is it sort of the same, or is there something in particular you're looking for?
Descriptions usually for me, or just the writing style, or just where the story might be going, and the size of the book matters too. Because if it's 300 pages, I'll think, well, I'll tough it out and I'll see what happens. If it's
Now there's a blogger speaking right there.
Well,
There's somebody who reads like 300 books, and they're like, "How big is it?" Yeah, I can.
Yeah, but it's a time investment. If I'm going to take a chance and read 300 pages, then maybe it's worth my time. But if I'm going to spend, if I'm going to spend a week and a half, and hours and hours and hours of my life, and it's we have so much time to. There's only so much. It's a very time intensive hobby, so you have to choose carefully.
Yeah.
And I want to read what I enjoy. I don't want to read something I don't like.
Mm-hmm. Joshua, what about you?
I'm learning to DNF. That's what I said on the forums to Steve. And the thing that I'm looking out for is, do I feel like it's predictable? And if so, is it okay, that feeling, or is it like, oh, not again? And it's difficult to describe, because I get that very, very fast, like, oh, he did this, and if he says in the next 10 pages this is going to happen, I'm out. Or, oh, he did what?
Mm-hmm.
So that's the feeling I'm going for.
I think of sort of Raymond Carver, where he says, if you show the reader a gun on the first page, it better go off by the third.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I think he might have said first chapter, third chapter, something like that. But
Well,
yeah. And similar to Steve, it's the same for me. The blurb has to catch me in. If the blurb catches me in, I'm willing to give the book a try. And what Joshua just showed us, like the book length, that kind of matters too as well, because there's our favorites. Like as bloggers, Steve and I obviously have our favorites. We don't really always talk about them, but when somebody of your favorite authors releases a book, it's high on your charts. You have to get it in. There's also, like Steve does. I know he does a lot of read-alongs. I don't know, man, how you do it, but that's kudos to you for doing that, because I know he does. Yeah. He has to carve out time to read out certain books because he's participating in the chapter discussions as well. There's competitions like SPFPO. You want to take part. Oh, but there you go. There's you're doing that. You're brave of you. It's a good book, but still brave of you. 10 book series. There's SPFPO, there's books, and then sometimes there's those gems that everybody keeps on talking about. Like, somebody like Patrick might say, read this book. Somebody like Steve might say, read this book. And then you have to kind of like be like, oh, is it really?
And they're doing the readathon.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. So it's hard. Yeah. It's definitely hard. And like Joshua mentioned, you got to learn to DNF. You got to learn to say, this is not for me. Maybe this is for somebody else, And even if 100 people have liked it, that's good. It's for them. You're the 101st person who did not like the book. That's absolutely okay. You just have to step away and say, read something else.
Yeah.
Good night, Paul.
PL, it's good to see you again. Hope I can chat with you all again soon, maybe on one of Steve's Friday conversations. Have a good night. Thanks, PL, for coming by. Cool.
Yeah, just to what you're saying here, it's that's the thing. Joshua, you got to learn to DNF, buddy. Yeah. You got to, like AA meeting. My name's Joshua, and I'm a completionist.
Man, if I had that for everything, I need to learn to stop. I need to stop buying stuff. I need to stop. That's a lot of AA meetings.
Yeah, well, most writers, in my experience, they're obsessive type people. That you can't do this unless you're fairly obsessive, and you have to learn to mitigate that. In my case, it would be, I would tell you the history of the Aztec Empire rather than tell you, a fantasy story that sort of embraces that world building, because I'm obsessed with the history and the culture. You just got to take that into your completionist attitude, because there's so many books. That's the problem.
It's true.
And there's so much crap out there, especially if you want to be an indie reader. You've got to be sorting through the just crap to get to the gems.
That's why I have Steve here to help me sort through all the crap.
Yeah.
But,
well, and I've said this before, that you guys, bloggers in the modern era, you're just doing heroic yeoman's work. I mean, there's so many books that to get through them and to tell people like, okay, this one's worth your time. This one's worth your time. And to try and sort of sort them a bit, saying like, this is the genres that this book is in. Because first of all, writers suck at it. And second, as time goes on, we are getting more and more, not me personally, of course, but many writers, we're becoming sort of taken over by the marketing aspect of it. And so instead of saying, here's the real genres that my book belongs in, we're saying, okay, what are the top 5 genres? Yeah, that's what my book's in. And we'll include just little things to try and get our books sort of sprinkled into those genres. Like, I see this all the time now. And it's, again, you need bloggers who are discerning, not bullshit accepting readers who are like, no, this is epic dark fantasy, don't give me your nonsense, or this is progression fantasy, or this is whatever it is, so that people can get that done for them and they don't have to go through the nonsense.
Yeah, like Kings of Paradise is basically comfort fantasy or cozy fantasy.
It's a slice of life.
Yeah, with a little romance.
Noble, bright.
Yeah, romance. There's romance coming of
For
age.
cannibals, for people with cannibalistic persuasion. So let's also add that.
Yeah, it's true.
Soul.
Yeah.
As if that doesn't work, if Steve doesn't help me with making those decisions and making my list shorter, then I'll have to start writing, because the quickest way to start hating or not liking something is to do it as a profession. That's what I say mostly. If you start writing, you don't have time to read books, but you are so busy with your own book that you are not liking the whole process anymore. You start hating stuff about it. I had the same with my Steve knows this. I had a board game shop. If you want to stop playing board games, have a board game shop. It's at a certain point I was explaining more board games than playing them. I loved my job. I loved the whole shop thing, but I just stopped playing board games. And I was really playing a lot of board games before that. So
familiarity breeds contempt, as they say.
That's what I'm.
In my experience, so I've sort of solved this problem. What I do is I read outside the genre. So I read historical fiction. I read, urban fantasy. If you read far enough, even in the fantasy genre, outside of what you write, I find it can be still enjoyable.
Okay.
You will inevitably feel as if you're doing a bit of work because you're trying to learn. How did he do that? That there's an undeniable nature to that. What can you do? But yes, I have lost some of the pleasure of reading, no question. It is what it is. The wave. What I like to do now is I listen to music, because which as long as you're amateur enough, like if you don't know what you're doing, you can still enjoy it.
We're keeping
being told
you here.
Secrets now.
Yeah.
You go find Mom, okay? Oh dear. At least there's only one of them. The other one's downstairs.
Oh, she's lovely.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, the time always flies. Whenever we get together, it just goes by quickly. So, I wanted to, before we go, I want to say happy birthday to Joshua. It's his birthday today.
Oh,
it's his first
thank you.
appearance. Yeah.
Happy birthday, Joshua.
Happy birthday indeed.
Thanks.
Mihir never did get to ask his questions.
Oh, it's okay. I can always email them to you.
No, what are they? 'Cause, yeah.
I just have one last one, and this is for the whole panel. Basically, just asking, what are you all reading, and have you found anything good recently? Because, let's keep on spreading the love for books.
Good question. Joshua, want to tell us about it?
What am I reading at this point? There you go. Have I found anything good that I read? Yes, I have found something amazing. It's a book by Richard Nell. It's
What a
Chef
brown noser.
Yeah.
No, and the book before that was also in the Malazan universe. So I'm really enjoying it. I had my click at book 5. When you stopped, for me it clicked, and now I'm reading at a very, very fast pace.
Nice.
How did you hear that? Yeah. From Malazan. Reading it fast.
What about you,
Mihir?
Steve?
I
What?
just finished the Leviathan Wakes.
Okay.
And then I'm going to be rereading, I think, The Darkness That Comes Before.
Oh, I remember
And,
that. Yeah.
we are starting a podcast here in a couple weeks to discuss each part. And then I think I'm going to be starting the Empires of Dust trilogy, because we're doing a thing with Anna Smith Spark in September. So.
Richard, sir, what about you?
Oh Lord, I'm always reading about 50 different books. I just my attention span is bad, but I'm actually reading some. I think it's called lit RPG, sort of the genre. It's called Defiance of the Fall. I think it is. Very interesting book.
Suspense.
It's the name of the author. I think the pseudonym they're using is like the First Defier or something like that.
Yep. First Defier, J.F. Brink as well.
Okay, so you know what I'm talking about.
I just Googled it.
Oh, okay, I'm on book like 5 or 6 in this series. It's sort of popcorn eating. There's nothing too deep. It's sort of, what's it called, wuxia, or I don't know how to pronounce it.
Wuxia.
Not heard of it.
Yeah, that's sort of the style of it. I'm trying to write progression fantasy and get into this genre, so I'm sort of trying to learn about these things. I'm also reading, I actually have a physical copy, C.S. Forster's The Ship, which is about, a ship in World War II. I tend to read historical fiction as a general rule. That's sort of my go-to for enjoyment. So yeah, that's the main ones I guess I'm doing now.
All right.
I just check that out.
And then Mihir.
I'm in actually a bit of a slump. I've read a couple of books recently which were good, reviewed them, but with regards to my SPFPS side and other books, I've been in a little bit of a slump, which is why I was wanting to ask this question so I could see if there was an interesting book to come across by. But yeah, no, Richard, release your next book. That'll hopefully get me out of my slump, Descending Dragon.
Here's counting.
Give me a few months.
Yes. Few months you shall have, sir. I'm pretty sure I'm just gonna. I need to read the SPFPO semi-finalist any which way, so that'll be okay. And yeah.
How many books do you have left to read in SPFPO?
Amidst my small lot, there's only 2 more I've read. Finished 4. Most of them, unfortunately, didn't do a lot for me. So there's 2 more left. But then there's my fellow colleagues have picked out at least 2 semi-finalists. I have those to read those. And then we have to decide. And then there's another person Jennifer, who's going to read her lot and decide if she picks a semi-finalist. So we'll have another pick from over there as well. So maybe at least 2 to 4 good picks, hopefully. And then we get to decide our finalist. So something fun to look forward to.
Yes.
That's a lot of work.
It is, but it's fun. So yeah.
SPFPO is sort of the perfect distillation of what I was talking about with bloggers doing heroic work. Like I assume the quality's getting probably better over time.
Oh yeah.
But still, you're just some random idiots are just putting in piles of crap, and you're going, well, I got to read this thing, and 30 of them,
No, it's and to be fair to the authors, in my lot, it's more so that their books are good. It's just that they're not clicking with me, and it could be a variety of reasons. Like one book, I'll just give you an example. I read a book. It was book 2 in a series, which is kind of against the SPFU rules. But to be fair to it, the first book was a collection of short stories. So this second book is actually a full novel.
Like
so I'm reading it. What, sorry?
Like The Witcher.
Oh, yes, like The Witcher. So I kind of felt a little bit lost because I hadn't read the original first book, and the characters in the book reference things from the past. So I'm like, it's not making sense. So kind of had to cut that, for that reason, because it was forcing me to read the first book, which is I don't need to, because if it's like supposed to be a standalone or a book one, so it's something happened like that. But I'm pretty sure like the fans of the books might be like, well, no, this book makes sense. It's just not for me.
Yeah, well, and you know that it's not going to survive the final rounds with people who are not familiar with that, and so you have to make these decisions. I sympathize with all the judges in Swiftbook.
Yeah.
Plus, it's a small lot, so it's only 6 because we divided it. So it's rather than reading 30, which would be very hard, 6 is a smaller number. So then we can go forward with that.
That's a lot of reading.
Says the man who's going to read R. Scott Bakker. That book, I can tell you, each book of his gives me a headache. I love his books because of the philosophical things that he wrote, but you cannot read them back to back to back. Like it hurts my head to think about how good they are, but how dense they are. Like
I've got a feeling, challenge accepted.
I mean,
what's his first sort of famous book?
The Darkness That Came Before.
Yeah.
That was 2003, I believe. That's a Canadian version, if I'm not wrong. The cover reminds me of that. But his first trilogy, I think I'm forgetting what it's called.
The Prince of Nothing.
The Prince of Nothing trilogy. Yeah. Originally in his outline, there was supposed to be one book, but when he started writing, he quickly realized the epilogue of that, the prologue of that book became its own story, and that's what this book is. The Darkness That Comes Before. Excellent. Like it's
so good.
The juxtaposition of the world is really fantastic, but his books are very dense and they're very dark. I mean, possibly he's one of the most grim, darkest authors ever. And I'll just say this because
Don't that to my TBR, man.
He's better than Steven Erikson's Malazan. I'll put it this way. No matter how dark it was, his books made a lot more sense than, at least for me, than what Malazan did. So
I'm not reading them for the grim dark. I know Steven Erikson doesn't like it that they are called grim dark. I read them because they are just amazing, crazy world building. My brain hurts every time, but it's a good hurt,
Yeah.
My description of Malazan is: if you don't like solving puzzles, you're going to hate the Malazan books. If you like puzzles, you're going to like them.
Yeah, it's a fair point.
Yeah.
That's true.
And on that note,
cool. Well, again, Josh, thanks for coming by and hanging out with us. I know it's late for you over on the other side of the world, so thanks for staying up late with us. Where can people contact you if they want to get in touch? When is your BookTube channel coming?
Well, Steve, you'll tell the people all about it next time.
Awesome.
There's no really. I am on the forum. Page chewing, Steve. Same name. There you go.
Yep. Easy to remember. Mihir was the best place to find you.
Well, that's part of the Fantasy Book Critic blog, and on Fantasy Book Critic on Twitter as well. It's a bunch of us. It's not just me. There's a bunch of amazing, cool folks. You can read our reviews, find out some books which you like, and see some of Richard's glowing reviews as well.
Yeah. Of course, Richard, the man that we all came to talk to today. Where can people find you?
Oh, they can just Google me. My website is myname.com. But I'm on Goodreads or Amazon or Twitter, wherever the hell. I don't like people to find me. Just find my books and buy the books and leave me alone.
That's why you're moving.
No,
right?
No, I actually really like sort of just talking with people who love books. I live in a place, and I've lived my whole life in places where, let's just say that it's not the most literate, arts-loving communities. So whenever I encounter people who love books, I'm always like, oh, you strange, wonderful creature. Where from do you hail? And anyway, look me up. It's fun.
Cool. All right, I'll have all the links down below for everyone to find everyone today. So thanks again for everybody who came by to chat with us, and thanks everybody for showing up. We'll talk to everybody soon.
Thanks very much,
Thank you,
guys.
Steve. Bye, everybody.